What's up, YouTube? It's Mike here, back with another video. If you haven't already, I ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell for notifications, and if you like the video, please like the video. So I've got a bunch of requests to do a video about stingrays specifically. So I've done a couple of videos that kind of focus on rays, but I wanted to do another one and kind of talk about pros and cons of keeping rays in the hobby, keeping rays with other fish, and even the dangers of keeping rays. I get a lot of people that reach out to me about stingray keeping, like they want to keep their first ray or whatever, and I get a lot of people that ask me advice on stingrays, and I'll be the first one to tell them and you guys that I am no ray expert. In fact, I have a few people in the hobby that I know from like Facebook and whatnot that I would go to for my stingray questions. So I am by no means a ray expert, but I do have some years of ray keeping now under my belt, so I can at least offer to you guys my experiences and some of the good, the bad, the ugly about keeping rays. So first off, I want to address, are rays dangerous? Can they hurt you? And the short answer is yes. So as you can see at the end, this particular ray, this is a female pearl stingray. She has 2 barbs right now. So the top one will eventually be shed and she will just have the one. But they go through periods of time when they are shedding the old barb where they will have 2. So again, that bottom one is growing out, kind of like baby teeth. When you lose your baby teeth, the bottom new adult teeth come in underneath them. Kind of a similar thing with rays and their barbs. So you will find shed barbs throughout the tank. As you can see, I've got quite the collection of barbs going. I've actually had a bunch of others that I've either lost or given away, but these will be seen visible in the tank or in the substrate when the barb is shed. And obviously you can see some of these have gotten quite big. Like this bottom one is off of one of my castexies. I believe that bottom one is from this big ray over here. So you can see these barbs can get really, really large, and then you get some really, really tiny ones from the smaller rays. They even get really, really tiny when you have little pups. So we got some pups here, and you can see how small their barbs are, and when they shed, you would see how small they are. I've thrown away a lot of the really tiny ones, but this is a pretty good example of a small one right here. That one's pretty tiny. Probably about the size of some of these smaller pups, what theirs would look like. This one would be a little larger. So as far as dangers go, you can get stung. They are venomous. It hurts like hell from what I'm told. It can get infected. You can have all kinds of problems, but the pain is severe, not just because of the stab wound, but also because of the venom. Now, in the wild, especially like freshwater rays, the worry would be you'd step on one if you were, say, walking in the water, and you would get stung because that would be their defense mechanism. But for me, at least in my experience, as far as rays go, they are pretty much harmless, even to other fish. They tend to not bother anything at all. They don't seem to want to just sting anything for no reason. For the most part, if you were to get in the tank with your rays, you could just move them out of the way by hand or with your foot if you're walking in the tank. And as long as you are careful and not aggressive, you would totally be fine. And you guys might have seen in some of my past videos, I have gotten in the tanks with rays. They generally just stay away from me. They don't even want to be anywhere close to my feet or anything like that. They're more afraid of you, and they just don't want to be bothered with you. They just mind their business. Nothing is out to hurt you. If anything, the rays know me. I've hand-fed my rays in the past. I haven't done that lately because now I got big cats that will try to bite me, so I just throw the food in. But I have trained a couple of those male castexi rays that I've had to come right up and take the food out of my hand, which is pretty cool. So they know you as food, and they are pretty much harmless. It is important to be careful, like when you're moving them, And I've moved a bunch of rays around over the past few years to put them in different grow out tanks and whatnot, and you got to be super careful because they will thrash the tail. You might not even get stung on purpose. That might not be what they're trying to do, but you could get hurt for sure. So again, it's probably going to end up in a hospital visit if you get stung. You don't want it to happen, so you got to be really safe and really careful with these types of animals so you don't get hurt. Also, you don't want to hurt the animal, so if it was to sting you, it's probably because it's afraid for its life or because it's being hurt. So we try to avoid that altogether, and we just be as careful with these animals as possible, and we move them as little as possible. We want to give them lots of space and not be moving them around constantly if we can avoid it. So next thing would be size, tank space, what size tank you need for a ray, and how big are they going to grow, how quickly are they going to grow. I've talked about this a bunch of times. For most freshwater rays, you want a minimum footprint of 8x4 in my opinion, and there are a lot of freshwater rays that can and probably would outgrow that over time. It might take them a while. It's not like the growth rate of a red-tailed catfish or something like that, which is going to outgrow that in like a couple years, but they will outgrow it eventually. It just might take them 5 years to do it, depending on your feeding schedule too. That would make a difference. But a lot of freshwater rays, especially females, like a female Matoro would get very, very large. They're known for getting really large. But even black diamonds, whatnot, I've seen some enormous black diamonds. I don't know how old they were, but they were way too big to be put in an 8x4 footprint aquarium. So I throw that out there loosely. But in my experience, and I've raised out pretty much every single one of my rays from very small pups, I'm talking 4 inches, other than my 2 Castexes, which I got around 9 inches from predatory fins. Now they are over 18-inch disc. So even the pups that I've gotten really small are all at least a 1-foot disc, and in less than 2 years. And some of them, depending on their genetics, this hybrid here obviously has superior genetics to a lot of these other rays that I've got because her growth rate has been insane in comparison to them. So I got her at 4 inches about 2 years ago now, and she is well over a 1-foot disc. She's probably pushing 18-inch disc. Hard to tell on camera, but she's huge. And then tip to tail, she's over 24 inches. So she has just outgrown all my other rays for sure, at least with the growth rate itself. So you can definitely have a problem if you had a small tank. She would totally do fine in an 8x4 still, but how long will that really get you? I don't know. I think just to be reasonable, if you wanted to grow out some pups in an 8x4, you'd probably get a good 5 years out of it, depending on your feeding schedule. So growth rate, very general. These pearls I got at the same size as her, about 4 inches. They were really small actually, and they have grown a lot slower than her. I got them, I want to say like 4 or 5 months before her, and obviously they're still smaller than her now. So she by far outgrew them, and they have stayed smaller. And I've heard people say that pearls stay smaller, but then you'll see some absolutely enormous pearl stingrays. So it might just, it could be a genetics thing, or it might just take them a little longer, or some just get huge and some don't. The next thing was tank mates that I wanted to talk about, because people are always worried about what you can keep with rays, and there's a lot of different reasons why you can and can't keep certain fish with rays. I'll start with the first reason, and that's potential to get hurt. And I've had no problems with that. In all my years of keeping rays, I've never had a fish stung. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. A lot of people have said that they've gotten their, especially catfish. Catfish are a big problem with getting stung by their rays. My problem with catfish and rays personally is the eating. Cats, especially the larger cats, generally do not need to eat as often as the rays do. I like to feed my rays pretty much every day, and I do not want to feed catfish that often. The other problem is most catfish will outcompete your rays for food, and that becomes a huge problem. Then you have this catfish that blows up like a balloon, it overeats, and your rays didn't get any food. So those have been my problems. I don't recommend a lot of those larger predatory catfish with your rays. It's just not going to work with your feeding schedule, and it's not going to work to really be able to feed the ray properly. So definitely things to keep in mind. I don't recommend it. However, I do keep this one big castexi with all of these catfish, and it works fine. He eats plenty well, but I feed the tank heavily, and I don't feed the tank every single day, but he stays very fat. It's just one ray. It does work over here. So I do have some other stuff in here. I've got the ripsaw catfish. I've got a ripsaw TSN hybrid, which is basically just a weird ripsaw cat. Gar have been great tank mates so far, although I do worry about some of these larger gar where they eat to the side, they grab food to the side, and they will bite. Well, I've seen them bite other gar by accident, or other fish too, and I always worry about them possibly biting a ray. Most cichlids will work well as long as they're not aggressive with the rays. They're gonna get along just fine. Very unlikely that you'd ever get a gar or any kind of cichlid stung by a ray. It's very, very unlikely. So another good option would be like clown knives. I haven't had any problems with those. As long as they're not aggressive, should work out pretty well. So sorry about the glass here. I have to clean it. But I just want to talk a little bit about pups. The pups, I definitely think need to eat even more often than adults. I'd say at least twice a day, and I'm not always great about that. It should probably be more than twice a day, like 3 small feedings a day. That's very difficult to do with a work schedule. So I recommend, which is reasonable, is like before work, get up in the morning and feed your pups, and then feed them again when you get home or at night. So they eat at least twice a day. And if you can feed them 3 times a day, it would be great, especially for growth rate. I'll notice growth spurts when I feed more often. At least in the past pups that I've grown out, I've definitely noticed growth spurts when you feed at least twice a day. If you can feed 3 times a day, great. And the last thing is just diet. They're not too picky. You can get rays on pellets. You can get them on a lot of things. For a really stubborn stingray, say you've got a pup that you newly got in and you know that your water perimeters are good and you're having a problem getting it to eat. That's a very common thing with pups. I would recommend chopped up earthworms for pups. That's what's gonna be most likely to get them eating. So it's kind of gross, but you get some earthworms and you chop them up, period. And the rays love them. In fact, chopped up earthworms are just a great diet for rays anyway, or whole earthworms once they get to some good size on them. So that's a good way to go for a stubborn ray. But for the most part, shrimp and tilapia I've had no problems with. Some people will say scallops and squid and almost any kind of seafood you can get the rays to eat. I haven't had any success with scallops or squid, but that doesn't mean it won't work. I probably could have put more time into it and maybe got them eating it, but for the most part, shrimp, tilapia has been great with rays for me. Rays are carnivorous, so definitely a high protein diet is necessary. But if you can get them on, say, like a carnivore pellet or shrimp, tilapia, earthworms, bloodworms, things like that, that's going to be more than sufficient. So the other thing people talk a lot about when it comes to keeping rays is the heavy bioload and the necessary filtration to keep them. For the most part, you're really not going to need to worry too much about having like crazy filtration if you're keeping a stingray in a large enough aquarium. However, you do have to keep in mind that it is going to be a big fish, and just like any other big fish, it's going to produce a lot of waste. Also, if you have to feed it meaty foods every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, there's going to be a lot of waste in the tank. So for those reasons especially, I definitely recommend having good filtration. It has to be efficient filtration. It's not necessarily the size, it's how efficient the filtration really is. So a lot of people will run big moving beds like this or big bead filters like this. The big bead filters are basically a moving bed also. Something like this is a luxury, I will admit, because they are expensive, but they're big pond filters and they have moving media inside, very efficient, and lots of surface area inside on the beads to house lots of beneficial bacteria, plus they have a pretty high turnover rate. So I don't want to like sit here and stress over filtration too much. Just know that if you're keeping big fish, you need good filtration, period. And rays are kind of an investment. You can get a lot of rays pretty cheap nowadays, but they're still a decent investment for your average fish keeper. If you're gonna invest in a ray and it's something you really are serious about keeping, make sure you have a good system for it. Make sure you got plenty of room for it, high water volume. The higher the water volume, the better. And of course, the better filtration you have, the more likely you will be to be successful. Rays have been really easy for me to keep. They've been very hardy, and I can't complain about like having problems with stingrays and dying or getting sick or any problems like that. I've had some shipping issues which were out of me and the seller's control, so I really can't complain too much about shipping issues. Occasionally there'll be a pup with a problem. A pup will either be shipped, or you know, you'll move it, you'll buy it, you'll bring it home or something like that, and it never eats for you and you don't know why because everything else is doing great. I think a lot of these things are just sickness triggered by stress from moving. Maybe it's a bacterial infection that you can't see, or something really stressed the ray out. But for the most part, rays, I have not had many problems with rays at all. I basically have every pup that I've ever bought still, and I have sold some here and there, but I pretty much have every pup that I've ever bought. Now some are years and years old. I've never really had any problems with death. So I think rays intimidate people in the hobby, and I don't like that. So I just want to kind of encourage people to get out there and keep them. Obviously, if you have the tank space, get out there and keep more stingrays. I can't stress to you guys enough like how much they've become one of my favorite fish to keep. So don't be intimidated by stingrays. Just go get the experience, keep them. You know, don't take any shortcuts. We don't want to take any shortcuts and risk an animal's life. But at the same time, you should be able to keep these pretty successfully if you want to. And you don't need to have like 12 stingrays like I do right now. I have a lot of rays. I also have a lot of tank space right now, so I know I can do it. I've got another 600 gallon that I'll be setting up. That is an 8x4. This is a good example you guys will see in the future of kind of like an ideal ray tank in my opinion. You don't need to keep so many rays. You could have one. They do very well as a single. It's not a fish that I say has to be kept in a group. I think most fish do better in groups, but they do not need to be kept in a group. Alright guys, well I hope this was at least a little bit informative. I know I kind of rambled on a little bit. I just kind of wanted to talk about the rays and give you some of my experiences with keeping them and encourage you guys to get out there and keep these animals if you can. But again, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and all the videos, honestly. I ask you again, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ring that notification bell. Follow me on Instagram at Off the Deep End Aquatics, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks.